bioethics,
law, euthanasia,
consumerism,
politics, terrorism,
globalization,
religion,
migrant population,
interfaith, drug addiction.
Now, modern science has helped us gain a better understanding of our universe and improve our conditions of living. On the other hand, many people have the impression that modern science threatens the Christian faith. Many Christians wrestle with these questions. For example, how should Christians respond when their friends tell them that belief in God is based on ignorance, to be replaced when they have more scientific knowledge? How should parents respond when they watch documentaries with their children and are told that the universe began with the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago? How should students respond to teachers who tell them that Darwinian evolution has disproved the Bible? Now, not only Christians wrestle with these questions, non-Christians also wrestle with them as well. So the late ex-Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, in one of his books, he has written this. He says, I won't call myself an atheist. I neither deny nor accept that there is a God. The universe, they say, came out of the Big Bang. But human beings on this earth have developed for the last 20,000 years and into thinking beings and are able to see beyond themselves and think about themselves. Is this the result of Darwinian evolution? Or is it God? I do not know. So I do not laugh at people who believe in God, but I do not necessarily believe in God nor deny that there could be one. Okay. So these are important questions, and many people wrestle with them, Christians and non-Christians. And therefore it's important to know how to approach these questions. Now in my book, I address these questions in 7 chapters. The first chapter concerns different ways of relating science and Christianity. The second chapter talks about, is science the only way to knowledge? In chapter 3, I addresses whether belief in God is based on ignorance. And here I answer that it is not based on ignorance, it's based on good reasons. And these reasons can be expressed in the form of the Kalam cosmological argument, as well as the teleological argument. I'll explain this later. Okay? And having shown that there are good reasons to believe in God, I then answer the question whether belief in God hinders the progress of science. Is it the case that, okay, once we know that God created the universe, we can stop studying science, we really have to answer, and we don't need to study science anymore? Again, I answer in the negative. I say that belief in God does not hinder the progress of science. Now, if that's the case, then why is it that many people think that there is a conflict between science and Christianity? So we need to learn from the mistakes that Christians have committed in the past. Okay, this I address in chapter 5. And then I conclude this book by addressing 2 very important issues in the contemporary debate. The first being the age of the universe and dinosaurs. How old is the universe? How old is the Earth? Okay? And I also address the controversial issue of creation and evolution. Okay, so this is an overview of my book. Now let's start with chapter 1. Okay, in chapter 1, I introduce different models of relating science and Christianity. The first model can be called the irreconcilability model, or the conflict model, which basically says that science and Christianity are in conflict. Okay? When science progress, it can replace religion. You don't need religion anymore. So these are always at war. Okay? This is the warfare model. And the second model is called the independence model, which says that science and religion, science and Christianity, they belong to different realms of knowledge. So science concerns facts. Religion, Christianity concerns moral values. They don't overlap, so they are totally separate. Okay, this is the second way of thinking about science and Christianity. Now, the third way of thinking about it is called the reconciliation model. Now, this model points out that Christianity does not just talk about morals only, right? The Christian Bible also talks about the universe having a creator. Okay, the Christian Bible also says that the universe has a beginning, right? The first verse of the Bible says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And the Bible also says that God's invisible attributes can be seen through understanding the creation. Romans chapter 1 verse 20. Okay, so and therefore proponents of this model would say that if you study the Bible correctly, if you interpret it correctly, and if you study the natural world correctly, these two should be reconcilable. They should be able to reconcile. They shouldn't be in conflict. Neither are they totally separate. They can be reconciled. Okay. So this is the reconciliation model. Now, I personally hold on to the third model. I think that I hold to the reconciliation model. And in my book, I point out that this model, in fact, has been affirmed by some of the greatest scientists in the history of science. Okay. Now, looking all the way back to the rise of modern science, okay, back to the 16th century, where Johannes Kepler, the father of modern astronomy, and we have Blaise Pascal, hydrostatics, Robert Boyle, the father of modern chemistry, Isaac Newton, everybody knows about him, father of modern physics. All these who's who of modern science, some of the greatest scientists in the world, these people who have contributed greatly to the progress of science. Many of these people are devout Christians. They are devout Bible-believing Christians. And they do think that science and Christianity can be reconciled. And even today, we have eminent scientists who are Christian. Okay, so, for example, the geneticist Francis Collins, the Cambridge physicist John Polkinghorne, and the Harvard astronomer Owen Gingery. Okay. So I have given many examples of eminent scientists who are Christians. But we also know that there are eminent scientists today who are not Christians. They are atheists. Okay. So we want to know what is the reason why they find it so difficult to believe in God, why they don't believe in God. Okay. So in chapter 2, I address their reasons. Okay. Now, when we read their writings, we realize that many of these atheists, they hold to the view that anything that can be known must be known scientifically. Okay. So for them, science is the only way to knowledge. If you want to know anything, you must be able to prove it scientifically. Okay. So this kind of view is called Scientism. Okay. Now we must pay attention that the fact that Scientism is actually not science. Okay. It's a philosophical view about science. Okay, it's saying that everything about nature, everything about reality must be known scientifically. Okay, so it's a philosophical view that relates reality to science. Okay, it's not science itself per se. Now, the word science has a variety of meanings. According to a wider definition, any discipline within the academy or the university could in principle be called science. Okay, there's a wider definition. But for those atheists who oppose to religion, people like Richard Dawkins, they typically hold to a narrow definition of science, which is a systematic study of the natural world through observation and experimentation. So for these people, they would say that God is not something that you can be shown to exist by experiments, right? You cannot put God in the test tube. You cannot do any experiment to show that God exists, and therefore we cannot. There's no good reason to know whether God exists or not. Okay, because for them they think that everything that can be known must be known scientifically, and there's no way to know whether God exists scientifically or not. Okay, so they think that there's no good reasons to believe that God exists. Okay, and so they hold to this view called Scientism. Now let's think critically about Scientism. Okay. Now, as I pointed out earlier on, Scientism is actually not science. It's a philosophical view of science and reality. And in fact, many scientists don't hold to Scientism. There are atheist scientists who hold to it, but there are also atheist scientists who reject it, and of course, Christian scientists will reject this view as well. So Scientism does not represent the view of all scientists. It only represents the view of a certain group of scientists. And in fact, it's a fallacious view. It can be shown to be false. Okay. Well, first of all, we can point out that science is a great way of knowing. However, science cannot exclude the existence of entities which by their nature cannot be detected by the scientific method. Okay. So God is not supposed to be a natural entity that you can put into test tube to test. God does not behave in that way. Okay. So it will be fallacious to try to detect God by the scientific method, because God by his own nature, very nature, cannot be detected by the method. Okay, and so science has its limitations. Okay, it cannot exclude the existence of entities which cannot be detected by the scientific method. And moreover, science itself is based on certain philosophical principles. Okay, this is the second point. Okay. I have listed here a number of criteria for a good scientific theory. If you are a scientist, you know this. Okay, this is widely accepted as a criteria for good science. What is a good scientific theory? A good scientific theory must be internally consistent. It must be simple, aesthetic appeal, intrinsic explanatory power, logical tightness, scope, okay, and also extrinsic explanatory power connected to the rest of science, extendability and testable, able to make predictions that can be tested. And to be able to be confirmed, etc. So these are the criteria. And if you look at these criteria, these criteria are actually by themselves not scientific but philosophical in nature, in that these criteria themselves cannot be proven to be correct by any experiment. So this criteria is actually philosophical, and the choice of this criteria is based on past experience combined with a philosophical reflection of what is the nature of reality. Okay? And therefore, science itself is actually based on philosophy and history. What this shows is that science cannot be the only way to know things. Okay? Because science itself requires philosophy and history. If science is the only way to know things, it will undermine itself. It will undermine itself. Okay? And therefore, scientism is fallacious. Okay? Scientism is wrong. So what I have just shown is that there are actually various ways of reasoning. Okay? There is the scientific way of reasoning, but there's also a philosophical way of reasoning, and there's also a historical way of reasoning. Okay? So science is not the only way to know reality. Okay? That is false. We have different ways of knowing. We have the scientific way, but we also have the philosophical way as well as the historical way. Now, which way of reasoning we use depends on what we are trying to find out. Okay? If you are trying to find out how the universe works, yeah, you can use the scientific method. But if you are trying to find out whether there is a transcendent entity beyond the material universe, you should use philosophical reasoning. You can use deductive, inductive, causal reasoning, which is required by science anyway. These forms the basis of science. Okay? And if you're trying to find out whether Jesus resurrected or not, you should use historical reasoning, okay? Because it's an event that happened in the past. And therefore, sometimes it amuses me, to read some atheists, when they say, oh, I cannot prove the resurrection of Jesus scientifically. That's why I don't believe. Okay? They don't know what they're talking about. Okay? So if we know what we're talking about, if we know the ways that we think about things, then we realize that there are different ways of thinking, different ways of reasoning for different things that we are trying to find out about. Okay? And therefore, scientism is false. There are different ways of knowing about things. Now, is belief in God based on ignorance then? Okay. So many atheists today think that belief in God is just based on ignorance. No? Oh, because I don't know how to explain how the universe came about, therefore I say that there's God. Okay. Or because I don't know how to explain how life originated, therefore I say there is a God. That's how they think we think. Okay? That's how they think we think. They think that, that's what religious believers think. It's all based on ignorance because we don't know how, therefore we say it's God. And once we know how, we don't need to believe in God. Okay? And that's why they think that when science progresses, it will replace God. Okay? That's the reasons the atheists frequently gave. Now, is that true? Is belief in God merely based on ignorance? In chapter 3 of my book, I argue that is not the case. Okay? I argue that the belief in God is not based on ignorance, but based on reasons, based on good reasons. And in this little book, I discuss two arguments, two reasons for believing in God. The first is the cosmological argument, and the second is the teleological argument. So let me briefly introduce the teleological argument, which is the argument for design, for a designer. Now, we can start by observing the universe and ask ourselves these questions. Now, why is there order within the galaxies, within the solar system? Now, we know that the physical bodies in the universe move according to a certain orderly way. Okay? But why is that so? Why is there such order? And why is it that this order can be described by elegant and intricate mathematical equations? Now, if you are a scientist, if you study science, you will know that there are all these equations, okay, which describes how the universe works. Okay? For example, E equals mc squared. I'm sure all of us know about this. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Now, why is that so? Who or what determined that the universe should be like this? Einstein didn't determine this equation. Einstein merely discovered this equation. Before Einstein discovered this equation has been there all along. Okay? So who or what put it there? Now, if the universe just came by random chance, then in the words of Einstein himself, we should expect a chaotic world, which cannot be grasped by the mind in any way. Even if man proposes the axioms of a scientific theory, the success of such a project presupposes a high degree of ordering in the objective world. And this could not be expected a priori. If the universe is came by chance, then it should be totally chaotic. But why is it so ordered? Why is it so intelligent? Why is it so rational? Einstein thinks that is a miracle. That's a miracle which is being constantly reinforced as our knowledge of science expands. Okay? So this is the act of God. There must be a designer, a creator, who determined that the universe should be like this. Okay. So the argument is that the universe does not have to be like this, but why is it like this? Why do mindless and unintelligent physical entities consistently behave in such a rational and orderly manner? And the conclusion is that there must be an intelligent designer who determined that the universe should be like this. Okay. So these are good reasons to believe that there must be a creator of our universe. There must be a God. Now let me move on quickly to the second argument, which is the cosmological argument. And this argument tries to answer the question, where do everything come from? Where is the ultimate origin of everything? Okay. Now, if you ask me where do I come from, I can tell you that, I came from my parents. Okay. And if you ask me where my parents came from, I say that, they came from my parents' parents, my grandparents. And where do my grandparents came from? They came from my great-grandparents. Okay. And small children, they like to ask, we keep on asking, right? Where did I come from? Where did I come from? They want to find out the bottom of things. Now, if you keep asking, we can go all the way back, okay, to where did the first human come from? Where did the first life came from? Where did the Earth come from? Where did the solar system come from? And where did the universe come from? And if you say that the universe came from the Big Bang, then where did the Big Bang come from? You can keep on asking that. Okay. And what we want to find out is whether there can be an infinite regress. Okay. Can you keep on asking forever? Can you keep on going into the past forever? Can there be an infinite regress of causes without a beginning? And the answer is no. There cannot be an infinite regress of causes and effects. Okay? And the reason, there are many reasons for why this is impossible. Okay? Let me just share one reason. Okay? One of the reasons why there cannot be an infinite regress of causes and effects is because it is impossible to traverse an actual infinite. Okay? Now, what do I mean by that? So let me illustrate with an example. Now, I have 3 daughters. Okay? So they are the first generation of my descendants. And if they get married and have children, that will be the second generation of my descendants. Okay? So the number of generations can increase. We can have 3 generations, 4 generations, 5 generations, 6 generations, but you can never reach an actual infinite. Okay? Because no matter how many generations we have reached, okay, you can still add one more. Right? So if we have reached 1,000 generations, you can still add one more, 1,001. If we have reached 1 billion generations, you can still add one more, 1,000,000,001. Okay? So what this shows is that you cannot reach an actual infinite by a sequential process. It is impossible. And since that is the case, we could not have reached the present moment in time from an infinite past. Okay? Because if the past were infinite, we would be required to traverse an actual infinite. But I have already shown that that is not possible. Okay? And therefore, the past could not have been an infinite. The past must have a beginning. Okay? And therefore, there must be a first cause of the universe. Okay? Now, why is this first cause? Okay? Now, first of all, the first cause obviously must be uncaused, right? Okay. So if the first cause were caused by other things, then it won't be the first. Okay? But we have already shown that there cannot be an infinite regress, and therefore there must be a first cause, which must be uncaused. Okay? And secondly, the first cause must be without beginning and timeless. Why? Because everything that begins to exist has a cause. You can't have a lion or tiger suddenly begin to exist without a cause. No, that's not possible. Okay? So everything that begins to exist must have a cause. And since the first cause, it must be without beginning, and it must transcend time. Okay? Because everything that exists in time has a beginning and has a cause. So the first cause must be uncaused and must be without beginning and must be beyond time. Moreover, the first cause must be initially changeless. Because again, you cannot have an infinite regress of change. Okay? And fourthly, the first cause must also have what we call free will. Okay? Now, why is it that so? Because for the first cause to cause the first event in time, okay, the first cause must be able to freely choose to move by itself. Okay? It must have the capacity to be the originator of the first effect in a way that is undetermined by prior events, since the first cause is the first. Okay? So it must be able to initiate change by itself, and it must also have the capacity to prevent itself from changing, for otherwise the first cause would not have been initially changeless. And this capacity to initiate change and to prevent itself from changing describes what philosophers call libertarian free will. It must have free will. It must be able to choose to move and able to choose not to move. Okay? This is refrain from moving. So this is what philosophers call free will. So it must have free will, and since everything that has free will is a personal agent, the first cause must be a personal agent too. And moreover, the first cause must have been highly intelligent, okay? Because the first cause is the source of the order of the universe, which can be described by elegant and intricate mathematics, which we have described earlier on. And finally, the first cause must also be enormously powerful and the ultimate source of all things in the universe, okay? Because the first cause is the first. And therefore, what you have here is a first cause that is uncaused, without beginning, timeless, has free will, highly intelligent, and the ultimate source of all things, and highly powerful. What do you call that? God. Yes. Yeah. My children know that too. They can also answer, yeah, God. That must be a God. Okay. And therefore, a God must exist. There must be a God. A personal creator of the universe must exist. Otherwise, the universe wouldn't have existed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. Okay, to talk about God. And so you can prove that a God must exist. And since God is the ultimate source of our existence, it is only in Him that we can possibly find the ultimate meaning and purpose of our lives. Okay? So praise God, we can know Him. Okay, now let me go on to talk about chapter 4 of my book. Now, I've already shown that there are very good reasons to believe that there must be a God. Okay? Now, does belief in God hinder the progress of science? Okay? And the answer is no. Okay? Why? Because we can treat science as a discovery of the processes by which the Creator created the universe and how created things operate. Okay? So believing that there's a Creator to the universe does not hinder us from studying how the universe works. Just like believing that my Porsche car has a creator doesn't stop me from studying how the car works, right? So we can treat science as a study of the processes by which the universe came about and by which the universe works. Okay? So there's no problem there. Now, why then do many people think that science and Christianity are in conflict? Well, I have already pointed out some of the reasons, right? Some of the reasons is because they hold on to some fallacious philosophy, Scientism, okay, which is fallacious, right? So that's one reason. But there's also another reason, which is the mistakes that Christians have made in the past. Okay? These mistakes have hindered non-believers from believing in Christ, in God. Okay? And I shall talk about some of these mistakes. Now, what are some of these mistakes? Now, one of the mistakes is to take passages in the Bible which do not necessarily have to be interpreted in a certain way and say that this must be interpreted in a certain way. Okay? Now, we need to understand that all texts need to be interpreted, okay? And the Bible is no exception. Okay? And throughout history, theologians have recognized different kinds of meaning in the Bible: literal, metaphorical, allegorical, symbolic, accommodation to common way of thinking, expressions, etc. Now, it's interesting to note that the 3rd century Bible exegete, Origen, he said this in the 3rd century, before the rise of modern science. He says that for that has understanding will suppose that the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd day and the evening or morning of Genesis chapter 1 existed without the sun and the moon and the stars. And the first day was, as it were, also without a sky. And if God is said to walk in paradise in the evening, in Genesis chapter 3, and Adam to hide himself under a tree, I do not suppose that anyone doubts that these things figuratively indicate certain mysteries, the history having taken place in appearance and not literally. That is to say, biblical passages in Genesis chapter 1 and 3, for example, those passages that says that God walk in the cool of the day. Okay? We are not supposing that God really had 2 legs, right, and that He walked in the garden. Okay? Because we know that God is a spirit, right? God is not a physical body, So we can interpret this not literally, but having taken place in form of appearance, is as if God is walking through there. That the presence of God can be sensed in the Garden of Eden, in that kind of way. But it's not to be taken literally. So it is to be understood phenomenologically, okay, in appearance, okay, but not literally. Now, looking at the history of science and Christianity interaction, a very important incident that we need to pay attention to is the Galileo incident, which happened in the 17th century. Now, I'm sure most of us here would know about this incident, right? So, the church at that time taught that the earth, the sun goes around the earth. Okay? But Galileo defended Copernicus' theory, which is that the earth goes around the sun. Okay? So there is a conflict here. Are we to understand this as science versus the Bible, or science versus tradition? Tradition ways of interpreting the Bible. Okay, which is it? Now, when we look at passages from the scriptures, for example, in the Psalms, okay, Psalms 19, okay, it says that there's this verse which says that in them God has placed a tent for the sun, which is as a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run its course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, circuit to the other end of them. And there's nothing that is hidden from its heat. Now, the Pope during the 17th century interpret this as saying that it is the sun going around the earth. But nowadays, I'm sure none of us interpret it this way, right? We can say that this can be understood as an accommodative and phenomenological expression describing how the movement of the sun appears to people on earth. Okay? And in fact, when we look at the context of this passage, it is quite clear that it is not to be taken literally. I'm sure none of us will suppose that the sun is really really a bridegroom, right? The sun doesn't get married. The sun has no wife. Okay. So this appears like a bridegroom coming out. Its appearance. It's talking about appearance here. It appears to come from one end to the other end. Okay? So we must interpret this correctly. So just as passages like a bridegroom is not to be taken literally, likewise such phenomenological expressions should not be taken literally. So even today, people still use expressions of the sun going around the earth, like sunrise, sunset, etc. But we are not taking this literally. So even Galileo himself didn't think that there was a conflict between science and the Christian faith. He says that the scriptures, the Bible, accord perfectly with demonstrated physical truth. But let those theologians who are not astronomers guard against rendering the scripture false by trying to interpret against propositions which may be true and might be proved so. Okay, so Galileo himself recognized that there are different ways of interpreting those Bible passages, and there is not necessarily a conflict. Okay? But it's very sad that the Christians, many of the Christians during his time, including the Pope, rejected his ideas and insisted that there is a conflict between what they say and what Galileo said. Okay? And this has led to tragic consequences, led to many people rejecting the Christian faith because of issues like this. So we need to learn from the mistakes of the past, and we must really guard ourselves from repeating these mistakes again.